مولانا يا مولانا ويا سميع لدعانا
About 250 years ago, a prophecy was made that the Cape was protected by a circle of Islam and would be spared from catastrophe. This was a circle of tombs of saints and awliya strategically buried around the peninsula. Men of high learning and philosophy from Malaysia, India, Ceylon, and the islands of Indonesia who'd brought Islam to the Cape. A kramat is a holy place and lends itself to prayer and introspection. Muslims ziyarat a kramat to pay tribute to these early men, not to worship them. The word tuang is a term of respect meaning Mr. Teacher and is afforded to one who is pious and righteous. It is against this backdrop of kramats and holy places that the story of the man in the cave can be told. A sultan captured by the Dutch in the 1700s and smuggled into the Cape, where he was locked up in a cell with other slaves and from where he escaped to a cave at Cape Point, today known as Antonie's hut. It is also the story of Juleigah Antonie, who is spiritually gifted and who claims to be a direct descendant of the Tuan.
Ek was 12 jaar oud. Ons het voorgebly en my ouma het agtergebly in Grassy Park. Eintlik my ouers is van Simonstad. En dan moes ek agter skool ek gaan help vir my ouma. Dan vertel sy vir my die storie van Antonie's gat. Hoe is dit dat die grootvader geland het in Suid-Afrika? Hy was gecapture gewees op die eiland in Indonesië in die 1700 met sy seun van die Dutch. Hulle was in 'n meeting besig wat die Dutch vir hulle oorrompel en vir hulle 'n capture en bring na Suid-Afrika. Maar hy was ingesmokkel, hy was nie geregistreer by die kasteel nie, soos die ander slawe nie. In 1743 was die Messias opgesit in Simonstad. En langs die Messias was daar selle gewees, wat vir die slawe gewees het. En hy was daar in die selle geketting met sy seun en van die bodyguards en van die mense wat saam met hulle gevat gewees het uit Indonesië uit. Hulle het baie swaar gehad en die struggle wat hulle deurgegaan het. En hy kon dit nie meer vat nie. En hy beplan toe, hoe gaan hy escape uit die selle uit. En die dag toe hy escape, het hy met die boot en paar mense ge-escape. Met die polisie op sy hakke en hy trek toe die aandag weg van sy seun en die paar mense wat sê die bodyguards wat saam met sy seun was. En hy land toe in Cape Point met die polisie op sy hakke. Toe hy in die gat gaan in die cave kom. En daar's net een wy in en een wy uit. En hulle kon hom nie vind nie, maar hy staan in die cave en vir hulle dophou. En dis hoe die naam gekry het Antonie's gat. Elke sonnagoggend het ons gaan ziyarat die 2 karamats in Simonstad. In die jare wat my vader geleef het hy vir ons geneem. Vir my en my broers geneem, dan gaan ons die bos. In die jare was daar nie pad nie. Toe was die karamat nog in die bos gewees. Dan sê hy vir ons, die is Ismail, die vader. En die is Jalil, die seun. Die is die vader en seun van Abdullah, van Antonie's gat.
Ebrahim Manuel comes into the story because of a dream he had in March 1977 when his late father told him to look up his family. Visiting the Krumats on Dolphin Road one Sunday morning, he met Juleigah Antonie and her brother Mogamat Zane quite by accident. They informed him that the 2 men buried there were their ancestors Ismail and Jalil, the son and grandson of their grootvader, the Tuang, who was at Antonie's hut. Ebrahim claimed to be related to them also and went to the car and fetched a document containing an inscription with 3 names.
Here you can see the names Imam Abdul Karim bin Imam Abdul Jalil bin Imam Ismail of Sumbawa, My grandfather, Haji Paka, he translated this. As you can see, this is in Arabic. This I don't know. This I don't know. This I don't know. Now, from here onwards, I went to the Grassy Park Library, I went to the universities, I went to the archives, I went to all these institutions to find more information about my family.
One of the things Ebrahim found was a deed of transfer with Jalil's name on it.
As you can see here, Abdullah, priest, slave of Simonstown. Now, this was granted to him 19 September 1823. This is the slave records kept at the archives and at the deeds office, and that is what made me more determined to find more information.
At the Seaforth Cemetery, Ebrahim found the grave of his own grandfather, Abdul Karim, the first Imam of the mosque in Simonstown in 1888, and also discovered tombstones with writings in Sanskrit, Buginese and Malayu, confirming to him that Indonesians had lived and died in Simonstown. In 1999, he made a trip to Indonesia and went to all the universities in Jakarta with the inscription in the Kitab. No one could translate it. In Sumbawa, he was told to go to a kramat in the village in Pemangong. There he met a man by the name of Abdullah. Ebrahim showed him the inscription in the Kitab. Abdullah examined the script and told him that the transcription was in ancient Sumbawanese, written in the Strazental method, and that the man and his son listed there had been captured by the Dutch in the 1700s.
He took me into his room and he showed me the family tree. And this is the family tree drawn up in 1674 with all the names of the family and the family names of the two missing people, Jalil and Ismail. And he told me that I am a 9th generation of royalty. And then he mentioned to me that in Jum'ah, the next day, they are going to dress me up in royal traditional clothing, and they are going to honor me as a royal guest.
The story really started for me when I went to Juleighah's house to interview her, and she showed me some videotape, some footage that the family had taken of the cave at Antonie's hut. And what I saw in the cave frightened me so much that I didn't want to do anything about the story. In fact, I wanted to move away from the story. And she said to me, "No, you mustn't be frightened. The tuang wants you to do it. You were chosen to do the story." I was flattered and everything, but I didn't take her word for it. I went to the kramats of Ismail and Jalil, the son and grandson of the tuang, and I thought that I would go there and see how I felt. And I went to the kramat by myself, and I never usually go to places like kramats or cemeteries. And I felt very peaceful and calm. And I came home and I decided to do the story. In a way, the story of the tuang of Antonie's hut is a journey. Juleigah had always known about Ismail and Jalil buried on Dolphin Road and had made regular visits there, but had never gone to Antonie's hut. She had seen the tuang first in a vision when she was a child, but it was only 3 years ago that she and her brothers decided to go to the cave and to the museum, where he'd been locked up. The years of knowing and remembering was a journey towards this moment, to tell the story and to claim her heritage.
My grandmother used to tell me about the tuang at that time the museum was the tronk. And so one afternoon, me and Muhammad Zane, we went to the museum, and there we find it so strange, the feelings and the coldness in the cells. And we went there to experience this. The lady that ran up and down with a child in her hands, she's so aggressive and like she's crying. And the small man that is sitting in one of the cells. And this man, he told us his name is Mahmoud, that he couldn't take it anymore, so he killed himself. And there's a lot of other children also. There was a woman, Rosie, and she got one child with the name of Ari. And I don't know if she died there, but she's also, it's coming up that These people, I don't know in what years it was, that it's a lot of people that were killed and throw in that hole, that people want that also to be revealed for the museum people to open up. We went outside to the other side of the museum, and it's strange there when we pass that wall, I can feel something, the presence of the tuang. And I asked the woman of the museum, what is behind this wall? And she told us this was in those years also a cell. So we went around and we went inside, and there I feel the presence of the tuang.
I was working at Simonstown Museum in May this year and came out after a lecture at 7:30 and saw this man standing beside my car. He was dressed like an Imam in a long white robe and then with the fez with a white band round it, as though it was a cloth band. And he smiled at me and I smiled back, and I got into the car feeling very goosepimply, locked the door, and he smiled again, and then he just evaporated. We have a file in the museum in which all these ghosts are recorded, because at one time this used to be the magistrate's court. It was also a company hospital, it was a private residence, and so there are many stories of ghosts appearing here. In the 1940s, my mother was visiting the magistrate's wife one evening, and she had a young girl appear next to her in the kitchen. And this, I think, is the person that we call Eleanor, who often appears here. And we don't know who she is or where she came from.
It was nearly 2 years ago when Audrey Reid made a donation to the museum for us to undertake an archaeological dig in the cells. She felt very strongly that it was something we needed to know more about. And just after we'd undertaken the dig, a family came to see us, the Antonie family, and they were very interested in the history of their ancestor who had been imprisoned in this building. We've always been aware of a young girl in this building. The various members of the staff and volunteers have felt her presence, but of late in the last few years we've been made aware that there are other presences in the building. Our previous curator felt that as we're always trying to find additional funding, she would start a series of ghost tours, and I feel this is where we went wrong, that we were making money out of other people's misery and that these people should be left in peace. So from now on there are no more ghost tours.
When I had received the invitation to come out of the Simonstown Museum, I was a little bit skeptical about all these things, because I get invitations for all kinds of things, and then they told me there were a number of stories associated with this museum, and I chatted to my wife about it, and I said, all right, I'll go. I didn't have so much interest in the matter at all. I'd never experienced slave cells. I did not know about them. I'd been in the castle in Cape Town, but very superficially I looked at many of these things. Now, many years later, I decided to accept the invitation and I came here. I think that when I walked into those cells downstairs, I, for the first time, came to realize the extent of the suffering of the slaves, because just the sizes of the cells and the scratchings of the wall, what were they trying to tell us when they scratched on the walls? What were the messages they were trying to leave for us, for future generations? And how did they die? And were they really punished to the extent that it has been recorded, and there are many recordings in history about the suffering of the slaves? And why were they buried in this way? Those are the kinds of thoughts that had gone through our mind at the time. One of the things we have to realize, we have not verified many of the stories that the people had told us here. We have just accepted that, and that has become part of our oral history. But that is the nature of oral history. Then we're not always sure what the people tell us about or talk about. But those are the histories or the stories that are in the minds of people. And just like in geography, you get what is called mental maps. It's a map of an area that somebody has in his mind. And in geography, we study that. And perhaps it's time that we perhaps also look at the mental histories that we have in our minds, because those mental histories will tell us about what people think or what people say about the histories of their community. It might not be historically correct. Most of the time they are not, but they are extremely interesting.
having read this article on the paranormal about a character who recorded bird sounds, and when he played the thing back, he got voices. Well, obviously, these voices came from somewhere around. Fine. Now, the thought occurred to me, I'm interested in history, always have been, particularly military history. Now, if this particular person, whoever he happened to be, could record sounds from wherever, masonry, the earth, who knows, it is possible, merely possible, that one could go to old battlefields, or even to the Houses of Parliament, and record speeches or sounds made years ago. And I looked around and borrowed a tape recorder and went and I made a recording in the punishment cell. It was absolutely quiet. I was wearing shoes which had rubber soles, so I was making no noise. And I let it go for about half an hour. When I played the tape back, there were a variety of noises. You could hear bolts being shot, doors being closed, footsteps. In the distance one can hear music, sounds of heavy breathing. In the early days, well, they were not only slaves who were employed there, but they were the sort of local Cape-coloured who are a very musical people. And these people would perform, they would be hired as a band, for the entertainment of the guests, etc. And this is the sort of music, if you listen carefully, the sort of music which they would actually produce. Somehow or other, the ambient masonry has made recordings. It must be, it's the only explanation. It doesn't come from thin air. So it is possible, in other words, for a building to act as a tape recorder.
The first time I went to the museum to see for myself what was happening at the museum, to see where these cells were, I went by myself without Juleigah. And I met with a curator at the time, Cherry Dilly. And she told me all these stories, all these things happening in the museum, how they were the historical society and how they looked for a building for a museum and how they found this old building, the residency. The residency had been around since the 1700s. In fact, I think it was built in 1777 for the first governor of the Cape, who had to live in Simonstown, called Simon's Bay at that time, because of the ships that had to come in over there, because it was a safer place for the ships to come in during the winter time. And actually that's how the first Muslims came to Simonstown. They went in 1743 with General van Imhoff to erect a landing station for ships. So that's how that community started. And Simonstown has a very rich Muslim community. The stories from Simonstown, and all these early people kept kitabs. There's a kitab that I had in my hands with the birth dates of people going back to 1830, but more than that. This kitab I saw had a trousseau list. It had the happenings of people. Somebody drowned, somebody had a tea party, somebody came to visit, the Imam didn't get paid in the mosque. All these little stick-in-the stories. And some of these kitabs have little stories in them, and the Muslims are reluctant to show others the kitabs because there might be things in it which they might feel a little bit embarrassed about. Things which would add richly to the history of the Muslims in the Cape. And so for these little feelings, or these little things that are written in the kitabs, they don't want to share these kitabs. But these kitabs would shed great light on the history of the early Muslims, because there are many Muslims sitting with these kitabs.
This kitab is the kitab of Jalil. It was passed on from his father Ismail, and his father, it was passed on from Abdullah, the tuang of Antonie's heart. And that was passed on from generation to generation to the Antonie family. And when they moved out of Simonstown, they left their belongings behind. So this fall in Hanif Manuel's hands. And this kitab is very important, Rayda. There is a lot of weksloon and azimats in, and spiritual powers in this kitab. It can't fall in anybody's hands because it can be very dangerous. This is the flags of all the karamats, of all the different karamats, yeah? And this is the tulis here of Abdul Qadir Jailani, our ancestor. This is the roots, the tuang, Abdul Qadir. His roots came from Abdul Qadir Jailani from Baghdad. Jailani means someone high. This tuang that is in Antonie's hand, he drew this picture that his family, his roots is from Abdul Qadir Jailani. This is the most important thing, this cross. This is in the time when the tuang, he landed in Cape Point. And when he came to Cape Point, this cross was there already. And it just shows that the tuang was there in the 1700, because this cross was there before the 1700.
In the old days, people used to keep all these kitabs in the mosques. And after the forced removals, the imams took the kitabs. So your kitab might land in another person's hands and you can't get the kitab back. So Juleigah has a kitab written, according to her, by the tuang, which was passed down to Jarley, and it has flags in it, it has a cross in it, it has all kinds of things in it, which proves to the family that the tuang wrote this kitab. But this kitab landed in somebody else's hands. So this is a big thing in the Cape. You can't talk about the early Muslims, or you can't talk about the Muslims in the Cape without talking about kramats and kitabs. Those are the links here. Bismillah, Bismillah,
Bismillah. The people who came here, the Muslims who came here, predominantly slaves. There were also a number of political exiles and a number of criminals. Now, the first very prominent Muslims who came here were Tuangs Abdurrahman and Mahmud and Tuang Matern of Robben Island. Tuang Abdurrahman and Tuang Mahmud, of course, they are buried in Constantia. Now, these people belong to what is called the Qadri Tasawwuf order. So the first input of Islam at the very early stage in our history was an input of spirituality at the Tasawwuf level. And so that, according to my investigation, the first dhikrs that were performed here were dhikrs of that order. For example, what is called the Gerwi Sharif, which is still being practiced in our community today by people who belong to the Qadri order. This order must have brought this dhikr at this very early stage in our history. The other important thing, of course, about Tuang Abdurrahman and Tuang Mahmud in Constantia is the fact that I believe that the very first embryonic Muslim community was started there, and not in Fori by Tuang Yusuf, as many of the historians tend to say. About 27 years after Tuang Abdurrahman and Tuang Mahmud and Tuang Matern arrived, they arrived in 667. In 694, Tuang Yusuf arrived. Now, he was a great spiritual figure. He was also, of course, a scholar of Islam, and had also fought the Dutch in the East Indies. He was also what we call a Majied, a person who struggles in the cause of Islam. When he came here, he was settled in Makassar or Fori. Now, he belonged also to a number of what is called Sufi orders. Now, the Sufi orders are orders within Islam in which people participate in a large number of spiritual practices or religious practices for the spiritual upliftment. And he belonged to a number of such orders. One of these orders, for example, that he belonged to was the Khalwati Tariqa order or Sufi order. And some of the practices we still have in the Cape today were brought by him. For example, when anybody dies in our community, we normally have a religious ceremony on the 7th night, the 40th night, the 100th night, and so on. It's very common in our community. Now, those ceremonies or religious practices were brought by Tuang Yusuf. It's very interesting that it has continued to be practiced right up to today. And in some of the investigation that I had done, I came across people or slaves from the East Indies who used to go to the graves of their forefathers that were buried there, because you must remember that the slaves were not buried in the normal cemeteries. Because they were slaves, they had to bury their dead on the mountain sides and in faraway places. They were not allowed the use of the local cemeteries. They would take scents, for example, and sprinkle it onto the graves and recite portions of the Quran or other litanies while they were sitting there. That was all brought by Tuan Yusuf.
kramat and karama must be understood. Karama is not the person lying there, but rather the deeds of that person who is there. These people are often referred to as awliya, friends of the Creator, people who have done good work, people who are close to God, people who, and in this case, in the karama, the kramats around Cape Town, all these people, these early people had come here and brought Islam to the Cape. How would Islam have come here? Whether they were political prisoners, exiles, sultans, slaves, they brought Islam from different parts of the world.
Muslims go to Kramat just to say goodbye to them, to greet them, and to make a dua on them, on their ruh. The ruh is their soul. To make a dua on their ruh. Because those awliyas are the people that we have to be thankful for with the guidance of Allah. That they are here in Western Cape, they brought the religion to us. They brought whatever we didn't know. And from there, our religion started. Our religion started because they never told us anything wrong. So a kramat must be well respected for. You must respect a kramat. He is not here to give what you want, to give you health, to give you rizq, to give whatever you prefer. Allah is the one. As I said it before, Allah is the one. And nobody else, just Allah. So therefore, if you go to the kramat, you sit there, you make your dua, you're going to Hajj, you're going to the Kaaba of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're going to Tawaf the Kaaba, you're going to what? You're going to Sa'i. And we think that those people are dead. Not in my mind, they are not dead. They are also in return doing you a dua. Also, they also baca a dua for you. Because people are coming from a distance to come and say goodbye to them.
Potom jika ons nou sê Abdullah al-Harham, né? Het gebly slag in die Wynberg, toe trek hy weer my kassa toe. Het hy gebly daar op die plaas, hy sien daar. Nou, hy sê Abdullah was 'n baie mustajab man gewees. Ek het een keer gewitness dat my een suster was baie siek in die Wynberg en hy het naby gewoon toe gaan roep ons vir hom en hy het daar spiritual werk gedoen, het dua gemaak en so aan. En immediately het hy van gekry uit die trance wat sy ingewis het. So was something was 'n wonderwerke, maar was baie te doen met die karamat. As hy Abdullah altyd bygewoon, kwyt gewoon daar naby die karamat. Dan die incident wat daar gebeur het een keer, wat Ebrahim gaan weer hy sandpad in Abdullah gebly het, was dit 'n storm gewees daai aand. Maar toe kan ons sien die huis lees so voor daar, maar ons is eentjie weg, daar lê 'n boom se stam so oor die pad, maar ons kan nie deurkom met die kar nie. En toe staan sy Abdullah daar, en hy wys hom by of moet kom. Maar toe Bia sê vir hom, ons kan nie deur nie, daar's 'n boom se tak wat daar in die pad lê. Toe met hy loop hy na ons kant toe, en hy vat die tak net so, en hy trek dit net so, maar was 'n groot boomtak. Dit was 'n wonderwerk van hom gewees. Maar daai man was baie mustajab.
Stories and legends of the early imams and kramats abound, and many families still have in their possession priceless heirlooms, swords, rati benches, items of clothing, kitabs, all with their own little stories.
Rayda, you see this show, it's about more than 300 years old. What we were told by our parents is that was the show that came with the Khatib Ismail from Indonesia. And it's one of the islands, we don't know exactly which island it is. And this was the show where our great-great-grandfather was wrapped in as a baby by the name of Muhyiddin. And as he grew up, this was also the show which his mother wore on her back. And we were told also by our parents that she was the woman who used to carry the key to the door of the castle in Cape Town. There's many legends going around in Simonstown about the mosque and the karamat and the former imams of the mosque. While doing a military course, I had to sleep in, couldn't go home. And I went to the mosque every night between Maghrib and stayed until Isha. And on this particular Thursday, which I will never forget, I sat in the mosque between Maghrib and Isha reciting the Quran, waiting for the waqt of Isha. And then about 5 minutes before Isha, the door opened. I heard somebody walking, but then I thought it's one of the Indians that still lives inside Muslim. We never moved out. It's coming to the mosque for Isha. I heard water running, like somebody taking wudu. But I carried on, and when the waqt of Isha was in, I made the adhan. But nobody entered the mosque. I went out to go and look, to see, because I heard the water running. The floor was dry, no taps were open. But I could have felt there was a presence in the mosque with me now. I went back, I made the iqamah, I made Isha. And up till this very day, I don't know, and I can't say who it was, whether it was old Imam Abdullah from the mosque, or whether it was the Karama that was up on the hill that came down to the mosque for that specific walk, but I could have felt that there was a presence with me in the mosque.
The Cape is protected by a circle of Islam, meaning that these people, as you can clearly investigate and see, that they are all on the mountainside and all on the hillside, and all the people is within this valley. Now these people are very powerful because of their prayer, and this place is truly and sincerely protected by the Almighty. For example, there was a fire up here in Signal Hill, and the entire mountain burned down. But if you look at the karamat and the things that is, the linen that is on the karamat, nothing got burned. So that is the meaning of these people's power, and that this place, Cape Town, South Africa, will always be protected.
The first time I came here by Ismail and Jalil, and Ismail said to me that I must go up there. There's the tuang Abdullah Zane. He lay there, and we went up the Sunday there, and he guided us to that tree, and we find, and we make a dua there. But all the other trees was burned. That time the fire was burning there. But that particular tree, the leaves, the tree wasn't burned. Tuang Abdullah Zaid was laying up there high in the mountain, and he said to me, it's dangerous up there, so we mustn't come up there, that he will come down. And he is by this tree here, and the same with the other one, Tuang Sulaiman, is on the left side here. These two Tuangs came down from the mountains, and they are guarding Jalil and Ismail.
As a child, Juleigah had always been told about Antonie's hut and how her father had gone there on Sundays. She had gone to the reserve but had never been taken down. Finally, the message came to her that it was time to go.
2 years ago, I get this message that we must go to Antonie's hut. I told my brothers, I was sitting in my lounge. That was after Fajr, when this man appeared before me. And the message he gave me, that we must go to Antonie's hut. So I told them, they couldn't believe it. They said, no, they don't know where is Antonie's hut. They never went to. I told them I was there when I was still small. The tuang, he will guide us.
The first time we came here, it was Juleigah and me and the son. So we were the first people that discovered this. And as we walked, we came to the top, and the tuang was standing there, and he guided us down here where the cave is. So that's why we know where the cave was. It wasn't difficult for us to look for caves, because he was guiding us to the cave.
Sunday morning, me, my brother, my son, we went to Antonie's hut. And when we get there at Antonie's hut, we were told that the rocks will fall in. It's dangerous. The next week, when we went back, That cave, all that rocks was falling in, and my brother, he couldn't believe it. He said, you know, it is dangerous, Leigha. Let's go. I told him, no, we must wait. He said, it's almost door. I said, no. It's, I got this feeling that we must stay and wait. It's like we must, I told him something, I can feel something is going to happen. We were still talking when I looked to the cave. I can't believe my eyes.
Once we came here and we saw, me and Juleigah and the son saw, but first Juleigah's son and she saw it and she called me. And they point over to that flat rock like a table over there where the tuang stand, all in white. And the wave coming in like it against that rock. But the tuang, you can see still standing there. Other people will be washed off. And he washed his hands. I think it was nearly the time of Duha. And he washed his hands and his feet. And he made like this. I saw him plainly, all in white.
The Tanah Baru at the foot of Signal Hill was the main cemetery of the Muslim community of Cape Town until January 1886 and has within its confines some of the most respected founders of the community. Men and women who to this day are honored for the roles they played in the establishment, spread and consolidation of Islam in the Cape. Men like Tuan Guru, Tuan Said Alawi, Pei Skarpi, Abu Bakr Effendi, and women like Sarki and Samida van die Kaap. The Kramats and Kitabs tell stories of heritage and past lives, and many of the stories, like Juleigah Anthony's story, has been passed down from generation to generation. There is no doubt in the minds of the Anthonys that their ancestor was a sultan and that his spirit dwells at Antonie's hut.
The reason why the story must be told, the tuang want this to be revealed. And you, Rayda, was the one that was chosen to do the story. This documentary must be taken to the Dutch, so the Dutch can help to uplift the family of Sapawa, the life they went through when he was taken away, when he was captured and taken away to South Africa. They had suffered a lot, and everything was taken away from that family.
One of the strange things that happened during the making of this film is that I was never allowed, personally, to come and stand in front of the cave and film directly into the cave. Juleigah and her brother and her son could go right in front, where the water's all running, where the water, right where you have to stand to look inside. But I couldn't. Every time I came close, the water would come and hit me. To me, I felt conflicted, because if the tuang wanted me to tell the story, why is he not allowing me? I didn't know, did the tuang not want his image on film? Did he want it out of the film? He was telling Juleigah he wanted me to use it because he wanted people to believe the story, but I wasn't allowed to film. After a particularly strange incident that happened to me, Juleigah brought two men to my house. And she said to me, Rayda, these two men are going to make a dua because there's some darkness trying to prevent you from completing this film. We then decided to go back to Antonie's hut and film. And when I got to the bottom of the cliff, for the first time, I've been there many times, I felt suddenly afraid. I had no assistance, nobody to help me with the film. I was shooting myself and I couldn't move forward. And I felt hot, I felt like I wanted to take my shirt off, and I became frightened. And the man, Juleigah, had brought these two men with. And I didn't know why she had brought these two men with. These were the same two men who had prayed for me. And the two men made a dua, and then they walked me to the front of the cave. And one stood on my right-hand side, Juleigah stood on my right-hand side, and her brother stood on my left, and the two men stood a bit of a distance away, and the son stood behind me, and they said, hurry up, you have less than a minute. And for the first time in 10 visits to Antonie's hut, I was allowed to film directly into the cave. And if you can see, you'll see the tuang in the cave. And if you can't see, you won't see the tuang.
Around the corner, Rayda, is cave number 1. Cave number 2 is this one here. And around this rock here is cave number 3. The tuang appear always in cave number 2. And sometimes here on 3.
I was watching television one morning on Sunday. I watch all the religious programming on Sunday mornings. And I saw this woman talking about energies and connecting with energies. And I thought I'd like to meet this woman because this woman could tell me, I felt this woman could tell me whether or not I should continue with this film about the tuang, because too many things were happening and I was at a point where I was going to just put the film one side and leave it. And the next Sunday I watched television again and there was a repeat of the same program and there she was again and again I thought the same thing. And again I did nothing. And hardly 10 days later, I get a call from Ebrahim Manuel, who's also part of the story. He met this woman, Diane, and you told her about me and she would like to meet me. I said, sure, bring her along. And it turns out to be this woman that was on television. And I said to myself, how did this woman come to me? I didn't ask for this woman, and here she is. I felt instinctively that this woman was sent to me. She had tea with me in my house, and I told her the difficulties I was having making this film, and it had taken 2 years. All my money's gone. Everything was used up. Nobody wants to help me on the film anymore. I'm filming by myself even now. And I said to her, should I continue with this film? Please, if you can feel anything, if you can call up anything, if you can experience an energy, just tell me. And she went into herself, and she sat there, and she said there was some darkness around me. She didn't explain the darkness at that time. Juleigah explained it at a later time. That was the dark energy trying to prevent me from completing this film. But she said, there's a darkness around you, but you must complete this film. A few days later, I said to her I was going to film at the Simonstown Museum. I was going to film the ghost files. I'd never been allowed to film the ghost files before. I was going to film the ghost files. I was going to film Mrs. Reid, who also at one point didn't want to be interviewed, but she was going to allow herself to be interviewed now. And when I was at the house having tea, I said to her, on a whim, I didn't plan this or anything, I said to her, do you want to come with me to the museum? I said, just go into the cells and see if you feel anything. And if you feel something, you tell me. And if you don't feel anything, you have nothing to tell. And she agreed and she went with me. And what she told me confirmed to me what Juleigah had said. For instance, the woman with the baby that Juleigah talks about running up and down with the baby, trying to tell her something. Diane actually got agitated in the cells. She actually was doing things with her hands. She was agitated, and as she was getting agitated, she wanted to leave the cell. And she said to me, Rayda, this woman's baby was stuck between her legs and the baby died on its way out. This woman is harassing me, wants me to tell her story. This woman wants the truth to come out. All these people here are following me around the cells. And the little man, she told me how when she was in the cell where the little man is, she was sitting in the center of the cell. And she was telling me that this man approached her and that the man was holding his neck and that the man was trying to tell her that he hung himself because he couldn't do any more what they wanted him to do. She picked up the spirits of all these people, and she told me at the end of the interview, she said to me, Rayda, this is a lot of work here, but what these people need is somebody to communicate with them and to take them. They want to make the transition to the next world. They haven't had a proper burial.
Die ene wat in charge was during that time, he was die Hollander, die groot ou, hy was die myn ou wat vir hulle so geterroriseer het. Nou, in ander woorde, there's more than that. Historical, more farther than that. But hy is die myn ou. En hulle het vir hom doodgemaak. 3 slawe het vir hom doodgemaak. En hy roep kamer agter. Daarom kan hy ook hier is.
I want I saw the hole where they had buried the people. Not really buried them, thrown them into that hole. I think the emotional shock was much, much more for me. And it was suggested at the time when we were down there in the cells that we should pray the funeral prayer for the people who had been thrown into the cells. I don't think that they had enjoyed those kinds of rights when they were slaves and they died here. And so Imam Waleli, he led the prayer. And I think it was a highly emotional experience for us because these people had died hundreds of years ago, and now after so many centuries we perform a funeral prayer for them. It is a wonderful experience in another kind of way also. Because these people were the forerunners of our community and they had suffered to this degree, and we have religious links with many of them. And perhaps even family links we're not even aware of. And that evening when I went home, at home, I thought about this, and I thought about all the slaves in this country who had died and had not received their proper rights. And I just got up from my chair and went and prayed for them and appealed to God on behalf of them. Because deep down inside me, I felt for them, and I felt a strange kind of connection with these people. Perhaps more than religious links, perhaps more than family links. It was another kind of link that I had with them that is, of course, colored by the religious link and the family links.
There were 3 other people that I met who were psychics, who are psychics. They have a meditation circle in Simon's Town. And how the story of the museum came to them. They were meditating one Friday night and they picked up in their circle a little slave boy. And this slave boy directed them to the Simonstown Museum. So the 3 of them went to the Simonstown Museum. And I spoke to these 3 people. They pick up energy in different ways. One can feel it, one can see it, one can feel it and see it. And all 3 of them experienced the Dutch officer, the woman with the baby, the old man downstairs. They also experienced an angry woman at the bottom of the stairs. But more than that, they experienced other people that the Antonie family didn't experience. Upstairs, there was a man dying of pneumonia, a man who was dying and who had come off a boat. That part of the museum where they experienced that man had been a hospital.
Ons, se ouers het ons geleer julle kan waarsku. Maar voor Maghrib, almal van julle in die massief is. Voor Maghrib in die massief. Die bereis die in die massief. Oké. Het gaat nu naar Maghrib man. En ek gaat op daar boel daar van hy wil af het op ek close toe. Soos ook kom hulle high level route, ek alles maar deur die high level route om daar af te kom daar op particulier gebly daar af en ek gaan dit ook weer eens moet, né? Ja, Allah toe sien ek haar. As ek so kyk, toe staan daar Amanda. Ek daar net so swart top aan, sorban gedryf. En die maak kom hier. Kom. Ek het net so gekyk of wie van die daar was niemand hier aan 'n pad. Toe plek jong. Van Bangiet. Toe as die kramat, wat daar lê, byna te weet van die mense wat daar lê. Toe hardloop ek reguit na ek weet of jy op Patifli ken nie. Ek hardloop nou op nie op Patifli se pa Imam Arfi. Toe vra hy oor my osemer. Wat jy dat pak nie my kollektief waarvan kom jy? Jy gaan op slaap kry van jou bier. Ek sê maar die kramat. Kramat het my geroep. Toe sê hy oor my wat het jy gemaak? Toe sê ek hardloop die osemer la ilaha illallah kom jy gaan na die kramat nie. Toe vat jy kop toe met wie aan die osemer. La ilaha illallah. Hoe kom jy nie gaan na die kramat nie? Dat jy vandag iets geweet. As jy iets geweet vandag van die kramat.
When I started this film had a completely different angle. I was not going to be in the film at all. But with all the things happening during production, during post-production, things going wrong, a lot of them technical, being rejected by the network, I can see now why the film took 2 years. I needed to be convinced because I was doing a film about what other people were telling me. And even though I saw the footage in the cave, I wasn't even convinced, even at that point. Oh, I believed what I saw, but I didn't take it into my heart. It was only when many other things happened meeting certain people coming into my life and adding to the value of my understanding of this kind of thing. I don't quite know where to put it. I don't like to use the word metaphysical, but this is definitely the unseen. And I think what this film has done for me, it has made me believe that things like this exist. The keepers on the hills and mountains of the Cape of Good Hope will continue their vigil, and the Muslims will always pay allegiance to these luminaries who brought Islam to its shores. The tuang has told his story, a story filled with pain and past injustices, a story that had its time to be told. The tuang will no longer appear in the cave and wishes for no one to come down there. But if the tuang's story is one of mysticism and spirituality, it's only one of many that's been told. There are many yet to be lifted out of the sands and pages of the Kramats and Kitabs of Cape Town.